Okay, not too long ago, we took a look at Halo 4 content that ended up getting cut from the game. And one interesting thing was the fact that a lot of the content that was finally revealed years after Halo 4's release was only found because developer kits were floating around out there and were eventually sold, and eventually pre-release builds of Halo 4 surfaced online. And amongst some of these development kits, there's actually Halo Reach builds that also had surfaced online over the years as well. And we've talked a lot about various cut content in Halo Reach already, and differences between pre-builds and post-release builds of Halo Reach. But there is something really interesting we haven't gotten a chance to talk about, which are some of the testing maps that have been used throughout Halo history. Matter of fact, there were some testing maps from those Halo 4 builds that never were intended to be in the final release of the game, like Sand Trap, for instance. And even when Halo Reach leaked online, there were some really interesting test maps as well that weren't intended for the game, like the Silent Cartographer remade for the sake of testing out AI. So we thought today would be really interesting to take a look through Halo's history and see some of these test maps that were never intended to be played on, but still exist in one form or another, whether it was a pre-build of the game or something that was just left in the game files after launch. So let's go ahead and take a closer look. So once again, for this video, we teamed up with Galaxy, who is a video game preservationist, data miner, and modder. He shows a ton of this stuff off, and he only has 1.2k subs, so if we can bump him up a little bit, can we get him up to 1,500 subs? That'd be really cool, because he helped us make this video possible, as he has access to these builds, and has a lot of this footage available for us. But one thing I think is really interesting about a lot of the test maps that are used during the development process are the ones that are used over a long period of time and are brought back in later games to test out different features. One map that has been brought back throughout various Halos during the Bungie era was a map called the Stripey Room, which essentially was a hallway that had a ton of different textures and environments built into it and vehicles and whatnot, so that when they were working on the sounds for the game and the audio, they could test out what things would sound like in different types of settings. Essentially, they had a room that had every type of material, every type of character, vehicle, weapon, and they could just test out whatever they wanted. And we can actually get a really cool look of what this map looks like. And while this, of course, was a map that had been used throughout Bungie's tenure at Halo, this also was used in Halo 4, which is what we're looking at on the screen right now. This is just something we think is really cool, especially since it's been a part of Halo for a long time and a way that the developers have been able to test out different types of sounds and whatnot, that after all these years, we can finally actually see what that testing ground looked like. Way back in the day when Halo Reach was still in development and Bungie was putting out promotional material for showing what Reach would look like, they used to do these really cool behind the scenes vidocs. And some fans noticed that in a sequence where they were showing some stuff on the screen, when testing out AI, it looks like, for a brief moment, the Halo Combat Evolved campaign level, the Silent Cartographer, is briefly shown. What's really interesting is that this was a AI testing grounds used in Halo Reach to test out the AI that they were using for that game. And in turn, they built this very small half version of the Silent Cartographer island with various rocks and other things to use for cover so that they could test out the AI in Reach, but in a familiar setting, considering a lot of developers who worked on Reach were still there back in the Combat Evolved days. So far, for the most part, this level, obviously not being intended for release of the game, is just half of the island with the structure that you can actually go inside that you typically would go all the way down to the bottom of in the real campaign level, but in this case you can just go inside the most shallow part of the level. But otherwise, it's just something really cool that now this little thing that we could see in a vidoc is now fully explorable because of this prototype build being accessible online. On another category, a lot of people have made memes about cut content in Halo Reach, specifically being the space squirrel or the space porcupine that was intended to be in the game. But as it turns out, there's actually a temporary test environment that was still in one of the prototype builds of Halo Reach that was used to test out some of the various wildlife that was intended for the game. It's just this boxed in concrete room, but it is really interesting to see things like birds, fish swimming through the air, which is kind of awesome. And then of course we can see our squirrel running around, or these weird porcupine things that never got to be a thing. There's also these slug-looking guys, and if you shoot at some of the animals, they do die, though they don't really have death animations, they just kind of die. Squirrels are invincible though. They do bleed, but they can't die. Also found in a Halo Reach prototype, there was a map called Lighting Reference, which is a map that had been used throughout development of various Halo games. It was used by Bungie and 343 for Halo 4, and essentially this map just was a mid-sized area that had various different objects placed in it so that developers could test out various lighting effects and test out different things for lighting references. For instance, there's this big Coliseum type structure on the map, which is kind of interesting, unlike anything we've really seen before, and the exterior does kind of resemble these large dams, maybe something that you would see out of Halo 2's Quarantine Zone, or maybe even Sierra 117. Just the architectural design is reminiscent of that. There's a lot of different grassy areas and a ton of mountainy areas alongside a couple of caves here and there. And while we're looking around at what was used for the Halo Reach version of this light testing map, you can actually see screenshots from a Halo 3 version that you can notice the same structure is in the background that we look at in the Reach version. So this map's definitely existed for quite some time. Also, while we were editing this video, we did notice that this one little canyon area does resemble this one section of the Combat Evolved mission Halo in one little area, so maybe they were inspired by that cave waterfall area too, but it could just be our imagination too, but let us know what you think. We're also able to see a little bit of water, which probably played a role in testing off of reflections. And just in general, it's kind of cool to see that this is something that also had appeared in Vidocs in the past, but is finally fully explorable, which Galaxy was able to explore and get this footage that we were able to use. Now, if we look back to Halo 2, there's actually a couple of interesting resource maps that are still left in the final version of the game, and General Kid's done a couple of videos on this already over on his channel that are really cool, and actually, as it turns out, these maps still even exist on MCC, but essentially, there are a few different maps that have a ton of game file objects stored on them so that when loading in the levels themselves, the game doesn't have to utilize individual resources for each level. It can just reference a main base level. And essentially, there are two different maps that have all the types of objects that will appear within the level itself available, and you can actually go around and just look at this random room. Actually, in Anniversary Graphics, they have full-on backgrounds, skyboxes from High Charity. There also was a different version of this same concept that was used for the original Halo 2 multiplayer that had all of the multiplayer assets that were utilized in the multiplayer side of maps that those maps would reference and pull the objects from. If I'm fully understanding how this whole concept works, General Kid has a great video on it. He explains it better. You guys could also check that out. Halo 3 is one of the games that we don't have that much prototype content on, as the builds that were released publicly and leaked online through developers kits don't have early enough test maps that were used for Halo 3, for example. However, we do actually have access to a build called the Delta build, which Galaxy has gone in and explored a little bit, and it is really interesting to see some of the things that were in this version of the game. For instance, from this, you can actually access the background map that is used on the main menu and use it to build on, which you can access the background map in Halo 3 from the main menu also, but it is interesting looking at the prototype version here, where you're able to lay out all of the different objects that are available in the game. I think Galaxy might have gone a little bit too carried away with what he was able to spawn into the background menu of the game, as it is a living map, and he just had all these Spartans just in the background while he's navigating through the menus, and it's kind of hilarious. I don't know, in general, it does look like it could be a ton of fun messing around with these prototype builds, as you just get access to things that you wouldn't think you normally would be able to do in a Halo game. Also, in this build, if you may remember, this also happening in the beta for Halo 3, but if you glitched through the visor of a Spartan, you could see this creepy looking face that was really just one of the developers plastered on there, knowing that people would find a way to look through the visor. It was taken out of actual Halo 3's release, but it is kind of interesting to look at all these years later. Then there also was this test map that is called Warthog Inc., which we've seen pop up in Vidocs, and we can see it accessible in the Delta build as still a map placeholder, though whenever it's tried to actually be loaded into, this build doesn't actually let it work. Not much is actually known about Warthog Inc. and whether or not this was going to be an actual map in the game or it was used as a testing ground, though it does seem like at some point there were considerations for Warthog Inc. maybe to be considered as a full multiplayer release, but maybe just ended up being cut and used as a testing map prior to then. In Halo 4, there are some really interesting things that have popped up as well. We actually talked about these a little bit in our Halo 4 cut content video that we recently did, where we looked at all of these cut maps that didn't make their way into the final version of the game. There was this FX test map that was used to test out a lot of the various special effects and other types of visual effects that would pop up in Halo 4. There also was this map that was a testing platform also for various vehicles that ended up getting cut, and more recently, Galaxy showed off this other version of a Halo 4 testing map that he hadn't even gotten footage yet for his channel, but he got fresh footage just for this video for us to showcase another map that was used during the testing stages of Halo 4's development. This next one we weren't too sure about actually putting in this video, but we thought it's interesting nonetheless, so we decided to include it. But apparently during the Game Awards all the way back in 2013, 343 did this thing with the Master Chief and Cortana in a cutscene type thing to get an award or something, and nonetheless in this build of Halo 4 we can actually see the cutscene room of that and explore it a little bit. It wasn't anything that was intended for release, but it was made specifically for this cutscene. It looks like it's taken out of that one cutscene from the campaign, but still, it's interesting to take a look at. And honestly, as of now, that's about as much as we know as far as testing maps that were used during the development stages of the Halo games. A lot of these are lost on developer Xboxes that are floating around out there in builds of Halo that never made their way online, therefore no one can actually explore the files of. But we do know that more of those maps exist, as obviously from various documentaries, behind the scenes things, we've seen versions of maps appear over the years, and little secrets that have been shown off in those documentaries that never made their way into the final version of the game. So we know they're out there, and we will continue to search for them, as these are a part of the development history of Halo and are significant, and it'd be really cool to see and maybe have a way to preserve these one day into the future. But hey, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on. Also, check out Galaxy's channel. Once again, we gotta help him hit 1,500 subscribers because he helped us with this video. Maybe he can continue to help us with more content in the future. A huge thank you to him once again for even making this video possible. That's it for today though. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.